Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first lecture for Bio 100, Bio 204. I know what class I teach. Um, so it's going to be slightly weird doing it this way. I know that everybody was probably looking forward to getting to use these animals and getting to really see a lot of biodiversity. But we're just going to have to do our best and with what we can. So starting off, I'm going to kind of do a very brief overview of the course, dive into evolution, and I'm actually going to save talking about microscopes and actual safety within the lab for when you come in person over the course of the next few weeks. But hi again, my name's Ben. I'm a master's student here at San Diego State, and I study the evolution of color in the bird family Cardinalidae. I study how habitat causes changes in coloration. That's my email if you guys have any questions. It's also on Canvas. My office hours, which are also on Canvas, are Monday from 1 to 2 virtually. And there's so much information in the syllabus. Most of the information you need is there. So I would 100% check the syllabus first if you're confused on anything. So to prepare for lab, make sure that you have watched this specific lecture and the main module lectures before every class. Read through the lab manual so that you're prepared. We have so little time in the lab, so you really need to make sure you know what you're doing ahead of time. You have 3 weeks to complete all the assignments and quizzes before our first exam. The first exam covers evolution, fungi, bacteria. It's a pretty big first exam, so I would really get a start on it early. To study for it, I'm always happy to help. I know it's going to be really weird to try and take this exam without seeing a lot of this stuff in person or really, I know, really dipping your feet in as you normally would. But the setup of the exam is going to be a question bank I'm going to post a question bank soon of several different questions. And then they're going to be on core concepts, like what is evolution? What is phylogenetic systematics? I don't know, you haven't taught me yet. Let's find out. So this course, this lab really covers evolution in hopefully a way that a lot of you maybe have been taught before, or if this is your first introduction course, welcome to evolution. It's a lot cooler than I think people give it credit for, because it's really the foundation of biology. Nothing makes sense in biology except in the light of evolution. You understand how things evolved. You can really get a sense of their biology and what is needed to help conserve them into the future. The general definition of evolution is just gradual change over time. The evolutionary definition of evolution, or I guess the scientific definition of evolution, is the passing of genetic information from parent to offspring. And this is evolution, right? Monkeys to man. But this is wrong. This is not what evolution is. It's a very common misconception. This is what evolution actually looks like. A big branching network of species. And over time, some of those species go extinct. At one time, there were as many as 5 different species of humans roaming the planet. But slowly, they all went extinct. So now what we're looking at is the extinction of our closest relatives. So now all we see are chimps and humans. And that gives the appearance that we came directly from monkeys, but we didn't. Chimps are just a cousin of ours from a very, very long time ago, because this is happening on the scale of millions and millions of years. So it's really important to think about evolution not as a ladder to more complex species, but more of a branching mechanism. It's constantly flowing and changing and shifting like a river. So the basic process of evolution, there are so many different factors which cause things to evolve, from natural selection to sexual selection to drift, to environmental variables, to changes in genes and regulation. It's like there's this complex concert of things that are happening. But I'm not talking about a lot of those because it's so easy to get lost in the weeds with them. So a good way to think about evolution is you start off with this individual and you accumulate mutations in a species, and you have variation, just like humans have a ton of variation in our physical features. And then some of those are unfavorable and you lose some of those lineages, and then the ones that succeeded reproduce and accumulate more mutations, and this keeps occurring over and over and over again. So it's important to note that individuals do not evolve. Populations and species are what are evolving. And I'm going to explain some evolutionary theory right now that you probably don't get in a lot of classes. And so if you don't get it, don't worry. Like, this isn't something I will test you on, but I think it's a really helpful way to think about evolution. And so let's think about how an organism evolves in the first place. And to do that, we have to talk about fitness. And fitness is how well an organism survives in its habitat. Let's pretend we're in a landscape, tons of big rolling hills. The top of that hill is going to be the highest fitness for a particular organism, and where it's flat is going to be its lowest fitness. So let's imagine we have two organisms. One is blue and one is red. Two different species living in a forest. They want to climb up these hills so that they can get to the point where they have the highest fitness for their environment. They're surviving the best. You can think of them as a little bit like a mountain climber, where they're continuing to climb up these hills, but they can never climb down because that would be de-evolving, right? And that's not possible. But they're continuing to climb up these hills. Let's take, for instance, species blue goes up this tiny hill. It's not the highest it can go, but it's the highest it currently can be at right now in this particular environment. It can't go any higher. It's kind of trapped on this little island. Red, however, can take either direction. So there's all kinds of random chance that happens, and maybe it goes up to this small hill, or maybe a mutation causes it to go to an area where it can evolve to a higher level of fitness. Let's just say it evolves feathers and it can fly now. All right, and so it'll slowly keep working on that and tinkering with it until it gets to be the most optimal place it can be in that environment. That doesn't mean that blue is less evolved than red. That means that blue is perfectly evolved for its specific environment. So a perfect example of this is sponges and crocodiles. And I know that doesn't make any sense, but both of these two animals have gone unchanged for over hundreds of millions of years. And you think about a sponge and a crocodile looks much more complex than a sponge. But the sponge is perfectly evolved for its specific environment. It doesn't need to change anymore because it's perfect for that specific location. But let's flip this on its head now. Let's say we take our forest that these organisms were in, and all of a sudden it's clear cut, or a volcano comes through and just decimates the forest. All of a sudden, it's a completely new environment. And now red is living in a habitat that's less optimal for it. But blue is now living in a great environment for it. And it can keep working on its fitness and getting better and better. And so things aren't more or less evolved than each other. They're just perfectly fit for the environment that they are currently in right now. And sometimes when these environments change, you might see that species go extinct. This is exactly what happened with the dinosaurs. So meteor came down, boom, anarchy, right? And the dinosaurs were living now in a completely different environment that they were not, they did not have a good enough fitness for. They were not evolved for that particular environment, and they died out. So that's kind of the process of evolution. Things are working as best as they can with the particular circumstances that they are given, just like our sponge and our crocodile. So I want to bring back to this very linear progression of evolution versus the phylogeny of evolution. So remember, things aren't more complex than each other. Evolution is branching and constantly changing. Humans didn't evolve from apes, we just share a common ancestor with apes. And this is actually really important to think about. I know a lot of you are probably like, God, this is stupid. Like, why would I care about this? And some of you, yeah, you're probably right. Like, maybe you don't need to care. But I would also argue that this layout of evolution that you've been taught has fundamentally influenced your perception of the organisms on this planet. Because we like to relate to organisms we think are complex and neat. And we tend to think that other organisms are beneath us because they're not as complex as us. So, for instance, that insect in your room, every human has no problems just obliterating insects, right? But insects are actually just tiny animals. But we don't view them that way. We view them as pests. Because there are a lot of factors that go into this conception, but I think a lot of it is this idea that we stand above everything else. And so if you flip that on its head and think about all life just spiraling out and spreading out, things aren't really better. One species isn't better than another. But we still think about it this way, and we apply our conservation dollars in this way. So, for instance, we disproportionately spend funds on things that we like and ignore the things that we don't. And that has really big ramifications for how an ecosystem can function. But I digress. I get a little off topic here. But so what we're really talking about with the spreading pattern is a phylogeny. Now, phylogeny is really to help us visualize how related organisms are to each other. So we can unite leopards, skunks, otters, dogs, all into one big group, which is carnivora. And then within that, we can get smaller and smaller and smaller and explore different parts of the tree. So the study of systematics is trying to infer that phylogenetic tree and understand how all these things interwork and relate to one another. And so a big part of taxonomy is a big part of systematics is understanding what taxonomy is and how things relate to one another. So for instance, we have our black bear, Urnus americanus, who's in a genus, Urnus, who's in a family, Uricidae, who's in an order, Carnivora, who's in a class, Mammalia, phylum, kingdom, domain. And so we can keep spreading out and getting bigger and bigger and bigger and incorporating more and more things. and or we can zoom in further and further into the tree. For a very long time, there was this discrepancy between phonetics and phylogenetics, and today we're going to kind of combine both of them. Phonetics is just seeing how two organisms have overall similarities with one another, and phylogenetic is looking at their actual evolutionary history. For a long time, people only looked at phonetics to see how things were related to one another. So all cats are obviously all related to each other. All birds are all obviously related to each other. But this actually got us into a lot of issues because we realized that by doing that, we didn't actually know how related things were to one another. We were using our own biases to make those assumptions. And that's why using phylogenetics is so important, because you're reconstructing how a group of organisms evolved. And you can do this by looking at how their traits are evolving and seeing how new traits evolve within that. These derived traits are called apomorphies. You should pay attention to that part. You should asterisk that. Apomorphies are derived traits. They're brand new traits. And so when we're looking at a phylogeny, we can group things by if it's monophyletic or paraphyletic. Monophyletic means that we're drawing a circle around all individuals that share a common ancestor and everything within it. So we're basically, let me actually get a laser pointer. We're drawing a line right here and saying everybody here is a monophyletic group. Whereas a paraphyletic group is we're excluding somebody from that. So for instance, if we're still drawing the line right here, we're only incorporating these guys and not the other ones. Part of the reason why phonetics is a little bit misconstrued or misleading, excuse me, is because of something called homology versus homoplasy. So homology is you have a trait that is really similar because of your shared common ancestry. So all mammals, horses, elephants, cats, dogs, pigs, bats, all have 5 digits or 5 fingers in their bones because we have a ancestor, we all have a shared ancestor way down the line. So even though the morphology of these 5 bones might be different, they might be fused together, they might have lost one, some might be elongated, they're all still those same 5 digits because we've shared them because of the shared ancestry. Homoplasy would be a similar trait is evolving independent of their shared ancestry. So wings evolving on birds and bats are totally separate evolutionary histories that have converged on the same trait. Another example would be cactuses and hedgehogs that have these spines. You wouldn't be walking through the desert and see a bunch of cactuses and be like, oh, hedgehogs, of course, right? So that's how we can kind of get into lost in the weeds if we're only looking at these traits and not at the DNA of these organisms. And I know I've harped on this a lot, but I think one of the most interesting examples of this is when scientists looked at the DNA of parrots. They found out that one of their most closely related ancestors is actually falcons, which is really weird because you would think falcons would be more closely related to eagles. They're both birds of prey, they have these big talons, they hunt, but parrots are more closely related to them. They have a shared evolutionary history together. And falcons have diverged away and have this homoplasy with eagles. They have converged on the same traits. Whoops, I didn't do any animations for this. Whoops, whatever. Evolution is important for a ton of different reasons, for understanding our own diseases, for literally creating the agricultural framework that can feed the Earth's population, all nearly 8 billion of us, conservation genetics, understanding how things respond to climate change. All of these are deeply embedded in the study of evolution. And I guess that kind of brings me to the last example, which got me really interested in evolution. And maybe it'll have the same effect on you guys. But it's the story of the California gnatcatcher, which lives in coastal sage scrub. And coastal sage scrub is the main habitat along the coast in Southern California. But over the last couple of years, because everybody wants to live on the beach in Southern California, it has been decimated. And it's gone from its historic range to a fraction of that. 85 to 95% of its range has been destroyed because of development. And so keeping it pristine is preserving all the species that live in it, right? If you lose that habitat, you're going to lose everything that calls it home as well. The California gnatcatcher, this is a better, this picture right here is that what is actually left of coastal sage scrub. All of this yellow right here, when it used to cover this entire range. So the California gnatcatcher is a special species found within California from Southern California down through Baja California. And they're basically two different versions. They look kind of different. They have different parts of their range. This is what the bird looks like. So up here, it's darker. Down here, it's a little browner. And they're distinct enough so we classify them as subspecies. They're not fully different species yet, but they're evolving on different paths. And maybe eventually they'll be two different species at one point. But this species right here is critically endangered. And since it's only found here, specifically within coastal sage scrub, the Endangered Species Act actually protects it. It prevents any development that would endanger the species range. So I'm not exaggerating when I say that this individual species has saved an entire critical habitat in Southern California, somewhere that is unlike anywhere else on the entire planet, this one species. But a study was published that was backed by a development company that tried to say that it wasn't a unique species, that it was similar to its counterparts. And because of that, they also petitioned to delist it from the Endangered Species Act, which would mean the entire habitat could be up for development. And that would mean the loss of coastal sage scrub permanently and everything that calls it home. And this figure is so much, so I don't want to bother you with it. But basically what it means is that other scientists called out this study and showed that what they did was they basically had really bad methods. And they showed that they were wrong in their assessment that it was only one species and not two, or subspecies. So using evolutionary biology and genetics actually preserved not just this bird, but an entire habitat within Southern California. And that was so inspirational to me because I realized that I could use evolutionary biology to preserve my home and prevent the destruction of it. So when you think about evolutionary biology, it's not this abstract thing that doesn't have an important place in your life, but it's happening all around you constantly, and you just have to open your eyes to it. So with that, that's the end of my lecture. I hope that wasn't too consuming for you guys, too boring. It's probably pretty long, but I look forward to meeting each and every one of you in class over the next couple of weeks. I know this is going to be a very weird setup for all of us, but we're all just going to have to do our best to try and get the most out of this and do what we can. So I appreciate your patience with us, and just keep an open mind. I think this semester is going to be a lot more fun than a lot of you think. With that, I'll see you guys soon.